Okay, good morning, everybody. It is the 3rd of April. That means it is day 8 of the South African national lockdown. For some of you, that time frame might surprise you that it's gone so quickly. For others, it might feel like it's dragging hour by hour, minute by minute. But either way, here we are, more than a third of the way through the originally proposed 21 days. This is the third video in Regent Business School's lockdown video series. And the topic of today's session is counselling generally. I thought it was important to talk about this topic because it's often a topic in terms of mental health that we don't spend a lot of time sufficiently acknowledging. And one of the objectives of this video series, of course, is to discuss strategies for taking care of our mental health and maximizing our wellness. And counselling, of course, is one of the best ways of doing this. So we're going to speak about counselling generally, and we're going to get to the point where we speak more specifically about online counselling because that's especially relevant right now. There's naturally a lot of misinformation out there about counselling, a lack of understanding as well, and that's why I thought it was important just to talk about this topic today at this point, because there are probably a lot of people out there right now that would benefit from a counselling situation, relationship with a counsellor, but they might not know it. So essentially, what is it? Counselling is an applied area of psychology. It's provided by psychological practitioners. They're regulated by the Healthcare Profession of South Africa, the HPCSA. First aspect of counselling is that it's a relationship between the counsellor and the client. This is what we typically call the therapeutic alliance. It's a professional, confidential relationship. And the aim of this therapeutic alliance is to provide a space that feels safe, a space where there is trust, and this allows the client to be vulnerable and to maybe talk about certain parts of themselves that they wouldn't feel comfortable talking about in other settings. Maybe because they fear the information might be disclosed, maybe they're afraid of being judged. So counselling is a collaborative process between the counsellor and the client. They work together to identify treatment goals and then to develop strategies for achieving those treatment goals. Once this rapport is established, there are 3 core parts to the counselling process in the way that I see it and the way I think about it. Firstly, there's the ability for the client to reveal parts of themselves that normally stay hidden, the hidden areas. This is important because it allows the client to cathartic. That's the process of verbalizing their thoughts and verbalizing their feelings in a healthy way, in a healing way. And that's important because it can allow them to hear themselves think, which is a good way of gaining perspective. It's also a good way of letting off some of the emotional pressure that might be accumulating and connecting the client with their emotional experience, which is a very important part of regulating emotions. So that's the first part, is just having the space to talk through the challenges and to talk through certain aspects about themselves. The second part then is building a self-awareness. So they do this by talking and by receiving feedback from the professional in terms of observations, insights that the counsellor might have. This then allows the client to understand themselves on a deeper level and to connect dots that they might not previously have connected. And once they have this, it takes them to the third part of counselling, which is change. Well, how do I change the things that aren't working for me? The defense mechanisms I have, the beliefs perhaps that are causing me pain and causing me suffering, maybe my self-sabotaging behaviors that I wasn't aware of. Once you start to become aware of that, then it's about saying, well, how do I change it? What are the strategies for doing better in this regard? So those are the 3 aspects of counselling that I think are really key. And you'd expect to check all those boxes if you were to go for counselling. So just a few things to look out for. If you're experiencing any of the following, you probably are a good candidate for going to counselling. It's not limited to these. It might be that you just have one of these. It might be for other reasons, as we'll discuss as well. So if you're feeling feelings of profound sadness, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of self-doubt, if you find it hard to say no, if you find it difficult to ask for help, especially with regard to your emotional well-being, if you keep the walls up quite high, if you feel easily overwhelmed, easily stressed, if you have difficulty controlling your anger, if you have difficulty letting go when people hurt you, so you hold on to the pain, you over-identify with the pain. If you feel controlled a lot of the time, if you feel anxious or have a tendency to worry excessively, if you find it hard to deal with conflict, maybe you feel lost or confused or directionless, maybe you're having problems in your relationships, your romantic relationships, your personal relationships, your professional relationships, and maybe you spend a lot of time worrying about things that are outside of your control. These are typically issues that we would deal with in counselling, and it would mean that you're a good candidate for going to counselling. So it's worth remembering that in the same way that anyone can go to a physical trainer, one can see a mental health practitioner. So it's not to say that we wait until things are terribly bad before we go to a personal trainer, or if we at least even start going to the gym. This is something we can do even if we're in good shape, even if things aren't necessarily a crisis. And the analogy extends itself to counselling as well. Counselling is about building healthy emotional independence, developing empowering coping skills, not about fostering unhealthy dependence. So this fear of becoming dependent on counselling shouldn't happen if you are if you are getting a professional service. So that's counselling in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more to it, but that kind of summarizes the key elements of it, which takes us to speak a little bit more about online counselling specifically. So you might observe that there's nothing intrinsic about face-to-face counselling that can't necessarily be reproduced in a virtual online setting. So this is different from other areas of healthcare, perhaps physiotherapy, something like that, because in those situations, a lot of the time you need to be in the same physical space to receive the treatment. With counselling, that's not necessarily the case. So what we're seeing is that this current healthcare crisis we're facing it's accelerating the future of work generally, and it's fast-tracking online processes that have been available for a long time, but maybe just underutilized. And counselling and online counselling is one of those domains. So often we have this concern with online counselling, or people have a concern that it's hard to establish rapport. And that's the relationship, the goodwill between two people over a video connection. But this can be pretty much negated in modern exchanges because technology has reached the point where the exchanges are fairly seamless. So you need to have a stable video messaging platform, of course. You need to have a good internet connection. Both parties need to be in quiet places where they're not going to be interrupted, where people aren't coming in or out, just to maintain that privacy and the establishing a space that is separated from day-to-day life. That's really important. But if you can get those factors right, then you can very quickly, you will find, recreate a virtual therapist room. So we have research on online counselling. Of course, there's been a lot of investigation that's gone into it over the last 10 years perhaps, and the results are very positive. They find that online counselling in most cases can be as effective as face-to-face counselling. For some more extreme psychiatric disorders, that's not the case, but for most of the conditions we're speaking about and we mentioned above, you will find that online counselling can be as effective in terms of meeting the treatment goals as face-to-face counselling. And of course, it provides some advantages. There can be a reinforced sense of confidentiality. The barrier to entry is quite low. It's quite easy to do without you don't even have to leave your house. You have to make sure that you're not going to be interrupted in your house, of course. If you are in a shared living space, that's something that you have to manage quite carefully. But once you're able to do that, you can recreate the setting very effectively. And those are the advantages. So people often feel reluctant to reach out to a professional because they're afraid of the unknown. It's a very out of the ordinary experience going to go speak to someone about your personal challenges and your emotional difficulties. But people might also have feelings that they're afraid of being judged, or maybe they think that speaking to professionals is a sign of weakness. I should be able to handle these things by myself. But in fact, it's really the opposite, because if you're able to reach out for help when you're not doing well, this is you taking responsibility for your mental well-being, and that requires strength. So it's important for us to reshift the way we think about mental well-being, because if we can think about it in the same way we think about how we look after our physical health, we start to see the real advantages of being proactive in this space and not waiting for things to become very bad before we start to feel overwhelmed, and then we're kind of reaching rock bottom, which is really the time that most people would reach out to go see someone when things are pretty bad and they think, well, this is my last resort. You don't have to wait for it to get to that situation. And taking responsibility for your emotional well-being means acknowledging when you're not coping, and finding the relevant help that is there for you and that does exist, because these are paths that have been well walked by people over and over again. There are paths to healing and recovery, and often we're not even aware of it until we are exposed to what that might look like. So that is really essentially the basics of counselling, and then thinking about the utility of online counselling. My name's James Sturdy. I'm with the Regent Business School Counselling Services. As I have reiterated in the other videos, the counselling services are still very much open for business. We're still taking appointments. You can make that appointment at counselling@regent.ac.za. This is, as always, completely confidential. And that's an option that you have. And I hope that after watching this video, if you realize that you are someone that would benefit from it, then reach out and take control of your own future. Thank you very much, guys. Have a very good weekend.